You don't talk about your feelings much. You handle things yourself. When someone asks if you're okay, you say, I'm fine, and you actually believe it, even when you're not. You grew up without constant contact, without phones tracking your location, without parents hovering over every decision. You learned early that you were on your own, that complaining didn't help, that the world kept spinning whether you were struggling or not. And now, decades later, you notice something strange. You still operate that way. You still don't ask for help. You still feel uncomfortable when people share too much emotion. You still prefer to figure it out alone. This isn't stubbornness. It's not emotional unavailability. It's something deeper, a psychological blueprint written in childhood that still runs quietly in the background of your adult life. You are not broken. You are not emotionally stunted. Your brain learned to survive in a world that required independence before you were ready for it. And that survival strategy became your identity. The way you move through life, self-reliant, skeptical, quietly competent, made perfect sense when you were young. It still makes sense now, even when it costs you connection. The first thing to understand is that your brain developed during a very specific cultural moment. You grew up in the gap between two worlds. Your parents were often busy, working long hours, sometimes both of them, sometimes just trying to keep things together. There was no technology to track you, no cell phones to check in. You came home to an empty house, made your own snack, did your homework alone, figured out your problems without an audience. Your brain learned a fundamental truth. You are the only reliable person in your life. This wasn't neglect in the traditional sense. It was the water you swam in. Everyone's parents were like that. Everyone's childhood had that same ambient independence. But psychologically, it taught you something profound. That emotional needs are best managed internally, that asking for help is awkward at best and pointless at worst, that the safest person to rely on is yourself. This shows up everywhere now. At work, you don't need constant feedback or validation. You find it strange when younger colleagues want frequent check-ins or praise for tasks that seem routine. In relationships, you struggle when your partner asks what you're feeling, not because you're withholding, but because you genuinely haven't thought about it. You were trained not to. You weren't raised in a culture of emotional processing. You were raised in a culture of competence. Get it done. Move forward. Don't make it a big deal. And your nervous system still runs on that operating system. The second psychological layer is about safety through invisibility. You learned early that the less attention you drew, the smoother things went. Your parents weren't hovering, analyzing, scheduling every minute of your day. That was freedom, yes, but it also meant that problems were yours to solve quietly. If you were upset, you handled it in your room. If you were scared, you figured it out. If you were struggling, you didn't announce it. This created a very specific attachment pattern. You became securely independent, but insecurely vulnerable. You can handle almost anything on your own, but you have no idea how to let someone else handle it with you. Asking for help feels like failing. Being seen in a moment of weakness feels like exposure. So you stay capable, competent, under the radar. Even now, when someone offers to help, your instinct is to say no. Not because you're prideful, but because your brain doesn't recognize that as safe. Think about how you respond to crisis. When something goes wrong, you don't spiral publicly. You don't post about it. You don't call 5 friends to process it. You go quiet. You think it through. You make a plan. You execute. This isn't coldness. It's your nervous system defaulting to the regulation strategy it knows best: internal problem solving. You were the generation that figured out how to record things on the VCR by reading the manual. You were the generation that walked to school alone, navigated friendship drama without parent intervention, learned to be bored and survive it. That taught your brain that discomfort is not an emergency, that you don't need to be rescued, that you are enough alone. And that belief runs deep. But here's the part nobody tells you. That self-reliance, that emotional independence, it wasn't just survival, it became identity. You don't just act independent, you are independent. It's how you see yourself. It's what you're proud of. The idea of being someone who needs a lot of support, who talks about their feelings constantly, who requires regular reassurance, that feels foreign to you. It feels weak even though you logically know it's not. This is the tricky part psychologically. The coping mechanism became the self-concept. You can't separate who you are from how you learn to be. And now when the world asks you to be more open, more emotionally expressive, more vulnerable, it doesn't just feel uncomfortable. It feels like betraying yourself. And this is where it gets interesting. The same traits that made you resilient also make connection harder. You're fantastic in a crisis. You don't panic. You don't need your hand held. But in everyday intimacy, when someone wants to know how you feel, when they want you to share what's going on inside, you freeze. Not because you don't care, not because you don't love them, but because your brain learned that those conversations don't lead anywhere useful. You learn that feelings pass if you just wait them out, that talking about problems sometimes makes them bigger, that the best thing to do is keep moving. So when your partner says, "You never open up," they're not wrong, but they're also not seeing the full picture. You're not withholding. You're operating from a psychological framework where opening up was never part of the blueprint. As you age, this behavior shifts in subtle ways. In your 20s and 30s, that independence felt like strength. You were the one people could count on. You didn't complain. You didn't fall apart. You got things done. But in your 40s and 50s, something changes. You start to notice the loneliness. Not the loud, obvious kind, the quiet kind. The kind where you realize you've been handling everything alone for so long that you don't even know how to let someone in anymore. You see younger generations talking openly about therapy, boundaries, mental health, and part of you admires it, but another part of you feels alienated by it. You were taught that strength is silence. They were taught that strength is speaking. Neither is wrong, but the gap is real. And your brain, wired decades ago, doesn't quite know how to bridge it. The psychological truth is that your behavior is a form of emotional regulation. It's how you manage overwhelm. When life gets chaotic, when emotions run high, when uncertainty looms, you don't reach out. You reach in. You rely on the one constant you've always had, yourself. This gives you control in a world that often feels uncontrollable. It's your anchor, your old friend, the familiar room you retreat to when everything else is too much. And it works most of the time, but it also means you carry things alone that were never meant to be carried alone. It means you become so good at self-soothing that you've forgotten how to be soothed by others. It means you're independent to the point of isolation, even when you don't want to be. You're not stuck. You're not damaged. You're the psychological product of a very specific cultural moment, one that valued independence over intervention, resilience over reflection, competence over connection. Your brain adapted beautifully to that world. It made you capable, grounded, hard to rattle. But the world has changed, and the same strategies that protected you then sometimes prevent intimacy now. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because the blueprint you were given doesn't have updated instructions for this part. You weren't taught how to need people. You were taught how to not need them. And that's not a flaw, it's just a fact. A deeply human fact about how we become who we are, and how hard it is to become someone new, even when part of us wants to.